Hey guys.
All right.
Angela.
No, you go.
Just let the audience build up tonight. So, Michael, do you want to get some views? See ya, Mike. Yeah. So tonight we'll be talking about bank valuers. Normally we're not seen in the same room as each other because there's always a bit of conflict and argy-bargy with an agent's opinion of value and where the bank valuer looks at it. A lot of time they can be totally different, so it's good that we'll go through it tonight as well. As an agent, what you should know, as a buyer, as a seller, what you should know as well. What do you reckon, Ange?
Yeah, so first of all, introducing Adam Nassif, which is here joining us today. So you would see him, I think most agents would have all bumped into him quite a number of times every year. So he's recognised one of the beach's top valuers, so it's good to have him on board tonight.
Top values, top prices.
Yeah. And all the complaints we get is because of this guy here.
Yeah.
So I guess what we're covering tonight is what banks. A good start would be to find out what a valuer actually is, or what's the difference between a valuer and actually an evaluation by an agent. We're opinion of value. So because we get asked a lot of times, why do we can someone come around? We need it for our accountants ask us for a valuation, super fund, and
a will.
So
tax.
There are times for in certain instances that generally an opinion of value from an agent would be fine and suffice, and there's other times that for other purposes, which we can go over and discuss as well, that you'll need a valuer, a registered valuer, which is someone completely different.
Studied a lot more.
Studied this. Even though they call us and asking for advice. So
He studied. That's the difference.
Welcome, Adam.
Yeah, thank you. No, thanks for having me, and certainly encourage while everyone's watching as well. If you have any questions, certainly fire them off. I suppose I always get questions, when I'm at people's properties, I want to ask questions. So I guess now is also probably a good opportunity to throw them off while I'm here, and it's good to be with you guys, and certainly look forward to tonight.
So, should we kick it off, Mark? Yeah. So, from what does a valuer do? So you've got Yeah,
so absolutely. So we establish the market value of a property. I guess for us, mainly our work's done for banks. So when any punter out there is looking to either buy a home, refinance, the bank will engage a registered valuer to go out to that property, do a full market valuation, and it's a full written legal report. So we basically, the process of it, what we do is, let's say if we got
most of the time it would be after it's sold as well.
Absolutely,
so,
absolutely. So when you buy a property, the banks will say, look, Mr. Valuer, we need a valuation, we need it for security purposes to know the value of the property. So we'll go out to the property, go check it out, do all the market research, evidence. Obviously we'll have the contract of sale, make sure that sale price fits in with the market value range. If it does, we'll basically put that report together, go back to the bank, and from at that point, that's when the lender advances those funds, so you can then formally settle on the property.
So why do they do the second value? What's the purpose of a bank doing that? Is it protect their interest, making sure there's no funny business, or they're lending you that basically if shit goes wrong, they've got an asset to sell? Why do they do it?
Absolutely. So they take your property for security. And most loans, they have a thing called loan to value ratio, and that's where they'll lend a certain percentage of the value of your property up to that limit. Now, most cases, give or take, it's 80% loan value ratio. Sometimes, depending on your bank circumstance, it can go 90, 95, even a little bit more. But the bank mainly engages us to make sure the value of the property and they're not overexposed. And they want to keep those, comfort levels to make sure that value fits in with their lending criteria. So they can then advance those funds.
So to simplify that, so if you're getting a loan for $1 million at an 80% LVR, you're going to have 200 grand cash. The bank's looking to give you 80% of that, so 800,000. And I think a lot of the point where an agent can have a bit of an arm wrestle if you're looking to get a loan and then the VAR comes in at 900,000, which means you only get the loan for 700, and you got to put in the extra 100 grand cash, which, especially off the plan, that can be a big sticking point. What's your experience been with valuing brand new and off the plan, or new and old, 4-year-old contracts to today?
Yeah,
do you see
absolutely.
much of a difference?
No, that's a really good question, and I get that asked quite a lot. Now, there's two sides of this. Is generally when off-the-plan purchases are made, they're made well before the building is completed. Now, I've seen two sides of the coin. I've seen when people have bought in a rising market, they've bought maybe, let's say, 5 years ago, just for a number's sake. And in that meantime, while it's being built, they then need the funds, they need to settle. Let's say they bought it for 500. In that meantime, the value of the property's risen to 700,000 without them even settling on it. So even though it's risen, kind of thing, we'll put the market value at 700,000 because the bank wants the value as at the date the valuer goes through. So even though you might have signed it 4 years ago, great deal for you, that's all well and good, but that doesn't matter for us. We just signed the value at that time. So I guess there's also a bit of a misconception out there that valuers are conservative, but I guess that's also a bit of a hearsay thing, because that's a good example where a lot of the time will come in more than what you pay for it. So that prospective purchaser might not need to even chip in that difference because they've already built that up in equity. So that's a good idea off the plan. But also on the flip side of that is if, let's say, if you bought it and then the market may be of decline, same deal, we value it as at the date we go through. So that's when you might have to chip in that bit to cover the difference in the market. Established properties, obviously you don't have that time frame kind of thing. It's just, it's there, I can walk in tomorrow, have a quick walk through, there's the value of property pretty much here and now. So that's the main difference between off the plan and,
And how long, for comparables, it's probably a good thing to compare as an agent. We try and do like within the last month, 3 months, depending how many there are. What's your guidelines? What are the guidelines to do a valuation for, let's say, a house? Do you have to look within a block size? Do you have a variance of if one block's 500, I have to look within 10% of that size and price? What sort of guidelines or units?
Yeah, once again, that's an awesome question. The bank's policies, believe it or not, is actually, maybe you did the valuation course by the sound of it, but the bank's policies generally is within 6 months of the date of valuation and 10% of the differences. However, that's a rule of thumb, and what we try and use is the most recent relevant sales. So let's say if it was a month or 3 months ago, what makes it a bit tricky for us is because you want to use the most recent sales or data, when you have a settlement period, let's say if you sold at auction, you've got a 42-day month settlement, technically we can't rely on that evidence. We can reference it within a valuation report, but unless it's settled, the banks generally steer away from those sales.
So what do you do for an off the plan? Because let's say you're in an area where a building there's not too many developments, and you've got an off the plan site. So let's say if the whole building hasn't settled yet, does that mean as a valuer you can't rely on any other sales in that particular block?
Absolutely. So you can't use any sales within that building. Even that's generally a bank policy. You can't use any within the development. So let's say if the one next door just sold, it's the first sale of the property. We cannot use that. We have to use sales outside of that development within our report to help establish the market.
As much as that sounds bad, that's probably in the last. I reckon that's probably saved a fair few unit developers and purchasers where we've seen 10, 20, 30% decline on new stock when this isn't across the board. It's more when there's 10 of the same unit, they just want to get them out the door because they've already sold 100. Where you haven't been able to go, well, they bought at 850, they just flogged one off for 700. Normally, if that was a second-hand market, they would have been crucified. That would have been a sale. Different building outside of it. We're here.
Because we're getting quite a bit of those as well. We're in the last 6 months, we've had what do we call it again? It's where basically a clearance, almost like a stock take sale for a developer, where they've got 5 left. They've made a great profit on a lot of other ones in there, and just to get the last ones out the door, they'll discount them.
And I think also values with arm wrestle. What arm wrestles do you have? Because I was speaking to one today, and there's always that arm wrestle between relevant but also most recent. So some values, if you're looking at Brookvale, won't look at DY, and some will and won't. But there's that balance between, well, it's a similar sale, but it's not the most recent, or it's not geographically. So would that be a bit of an arm wrestle you face as well, or
Absolutely,
valuer's discretion?
Definitely. And in the ideal case scenario, would love 5 properties exactly the same as the one we're valuing, because that makes
it. DY then, there's 8,000.
Exactly right. DY makes it quite easy.
Value is heaven.
Exactly right. And like I said, would love 5 properties identical, but in the real life scenario, does that happen? No.
No.
So, in an area, let's say if it was just all houses and you've got a unit development in that area, you then have to look outside that suburb, because there's no kind of precedence for that thing if that's maybe the only unit complex in that area.
Yep.
So we can say that, but we'll say, look, due to the lack of sales or that type of property for that area, we've gone to the adjoining suburbs to look at what comparables have sold there as well. So we need to account all the information and not just be, selective of what we take. We've got to, a single sale doesn't form a market. A group of properties form a market.
That's perfect there, because I've had that where a client took a single sale, raised their benchmark, and it fucked the campaign just using one set. So that's a good one. So you would be saying 3 or 4 minimum?
Absolutely, at minimum. I know personally for our reports we do 5 sales.
Yes.
5. So, and I guess there's a little bit of a misconception out there of value. Value walks through, there's a value property. Absolutely not. Once we go through, we do a lot behind the scenes, even before we get to a figure, all the analysis, break up those sales one by one. And as far as a value, the conservative valuer, disregardless if we value it for a bank, private purposes, accounting, stamp duty, that value's the same, disregardless. Because we need to fully justify how we got to that value, what evidence we used, how we got there. So if we ever get audited, we have to show all our workings, so how we got to that. And I guess it's a little bit hard from the end time. All they get hurt here is the value, and without that understanding, it does make sense to go, well, how does that make sense? But unfortunately, the banks don't provide those reports, because we essentially act for the banks at the end of the day. So we provide that to the banks, but it is a process we go through to establish that market value.
This is now going back onto private treaty or auctions. So when you're going down the path of, let's say you're a buyer and you're going to purchase a property with a cooling off period. So you've got a bit of time there where that cooling off, there's a little small deposit paid, and you that's when generally a valuation will get done. And there's, in most cases, or in all those cases, there'll be an exchange contract, so you actually have a price on there. At an auction, is it pretty safe to buy? I mean, with valuations, how do you go through there when you go through valuing a property once it's sold at auction? Have you had many that you've seen that hang on the person at auction overpaid, or do you turn around and say, okay, well, it was under an auction conditions, and there was another 5 people bidding for the property in that room, so that must be?
Yeah, absolutely.
That was a good question, wasn't it?
It's top your question.
I've got to get one.
How can you top that?
I believe that's what I said before. You just used my question.
That's true. But no. The thing is, with the auction, I'd say to the punter out there, do your homework, look at your sales. One thing we can value is we can take into account evidence, market conditions, everything, but one thing we can't value is emotion. That's one thing a valuer can't value is emotion. Now, how does that relate back to an auction campaign? I'm sure you guys have seen it where you've got one of those properties that went to auction where theoretically it should make X amount of dollars based on all the market evidence. But there may have been two parties, for example, 3 parties where they don't care. They're looking to live there for 30 years. They're not trying to justify, oh, look, that's got a kitchen and that's got a pool. They go, my family lives across the road, or I grew up in that school, I want to take my kids there. Sometimes there's a value based on the market, but then there's the emotional value, what you're willing to pay because, your personal circumstances. And that's one instance where you might have an auction campaign, it does unbelievable numbers, but, when we come through, we can't put a value on that emotion. If all the evidence suggests that it's X amount, we put X amount disregardless of the auction price. 99% of the time, auction does reflect the market value, because a market value is essentially, definition is between a willing buyer, willing seller, arm's length transaction, prudent, blah, blah, blah. But that's one thing we can't value. So, that's why essentially a bank, sends someone out, a valuer, to make sure it does stack up, it is okay, and they can lend at those levels. Because what the bank's essentially doing, let's say if whoever can't, pay their loan and it defaults, and then that goes to auction again. What happens if you don't have those
Yep.
two people that have
Big
those
game.
same emotions for that property? The wider market will, still draw a value for that property, putting emotions aside.
I'd love to know.
Quick question. Lisa, one of our viewers has asked, Lisa Novak, if you can repeat the question. If you're not happy with the valuation, what are your options?
So if you're not happy with the valuation, call Adam.
Yeah, direct.
Brown paper bag, you get what you want.
Exactly. They're the green ones.
Yeah.
No, and that's good. So let's say if you've got a valuation carried out, and you've probably gone through a broker or maybe the bank direct, they've said, look, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the valuation came in at X amount, and you've gone, you know what, there's no way, I'm not happy about that. What's your recourse? Can you, contest it? Absolutely you can. Now, you can't just contest and say the valuation's wrong,
I need $1 million.
Exactly.
Not good enough. Go back out there.
Exactly
Make it work.
right. You can't just go along that. Provide additional evidence, and there's a process about that. So let's say you've got some additional sales the valuer missed within their report, or that's the best one, because if there's evidence there, the valuer can then make adjustments based on the evidence you didn't use. That's probably your best and only recourse. You can come back because the value, if it goes back and with nothing, it's not going to be changed. The value can't just change just because they said you're wrong.
Yeah. But does it go back to the valuer? Won't you sort of take it as an insult, or does it go to the manager? Or
No, how it works.
How does it work?
Absolutely. So obviously, because you're genuinely the bank's client, or depending on the purpose of the valuation, of course. But let's say if it was going through a bank, it would go through the bank, and then it would then come to our system. And our systems are online. Back in the day, it used to be paper, in dinosaur ages, but now it's all online system. And it'll simply show amendment request. We'll come up with a property, and it will show the additional information provided, and then the valuer can take that additional information on board. And a lot of times they do get changed. Don't get me wrong. It's not the kind of thing where on the value I'm right. Honestly, there could have been a sale that may have been missed or off market. Absolutely, because a lot of these data companies, RP Data, your price finders. If it's off market, sometimes they're not picked up. We don't get brochures or the sales or the information. It can be missed. So definitely, that's the best way you can have a little bit of recourse and go
And
back.
I think it's getting quite common now to get. I've had a couple of clients where they've had one vow and they feel disheartened, but it's quite common to get 2 or 3 vows for a property to see where it's at. One thing I'd love to know is, what's your view on, like, when we're going in there and a client says, I'm going to paint this, renovate that, where do you add for little improvements?
Definitely.
Like, how do you perceive them doing the garden, doing the painting, or what in your mind when you see that? What do you think? Because I know we've got it in our.
We've got an amount that we say,
got,
okay,
oh,
the garage is
painting
worth this much.
Like, what's your, in the valuer world?
Every property is different on far as the recommendations. Now, we always work backwards because we have to be fact-based, not just because I say, look, I say so, do this. So what I do is, let's find a property that achieved the maximum value, and let's break that up. What are the things that achieve that value? Was it an amazing kitchen, the bathrooms? Was it the living area? And once we can break that out, we can work out the things you maximise and the things you don't worry about. So for an example, let's say in DY, a renovated 2-bedroom unit will go, say, $750. Let's look at the finishes of that unit, and let's weigh that up against cost.
Yep.
There's a big and I see this happen all the time. People will do a renovation. Cost does not equate to value because everyone does it. You go into a tile store or whatever, a kitchen, you pick
more expensive. I've got
exactly. I love whatever this sink that costs $25,000.
Like, the marble, it's like it's going to cost me $10,000 to get it out.
Exactly right. So don't sometimes try and take the emotion out of it in buying. Just look at what are the things achieving prices. So let's say, for example, if we were just a quick summary.
Two things you had to, if you were going to invest to get your val higher in a unit, what were the 2 things you do?
Kitchen, bathroom.
Kitchen, bathroom.
And small things, like let's say for a bathroom, it only costs about $1,500 more sometimes. If you renovate a bathroom, tile to ceiling, that is such an easy thing to do to give a perception of a much more expensive look. So many renos I do, we call it a project style look, where it's just like get the minimum in there. Yeah, it's modern, but it's just basic and it doesn't come off across good. if you look at successful developers, what they'll do, they'll give that luxurious feel
Yes.
kind of thing. You look at the bathrooms, that's a good way. First thing, look at the bathroom. Is it tiled to ceiling? That's a quick way. Look at the tapware. Look at, is it, floating vanity? Is it frameless shower screen? Just those small things can add such value to the property.
It's funny you say that, because as Asians, I think we're the opposite.
Yeah.
I think we go into a property and we're like, the three things that I'd go into is floors, paint, and style.
Absolutely, I guess the difference between, that's where an agent will come in and a valuer, is because selling, definitely, you've got to think, we're valuing a lot of properties per day, and it might not have a big effect as far as value, but when you're selling, definitely, because you don't want to present a property with tied paint and the timber flooring all scuffed up. That's certainly going to affect your buyer appeal, and you guys, you want that competition there as far as bringing buyers through. As far as values, we look at pretty much a big ticket
interesting,
items.
though.
Yeah.
It is, because we didn't think of it. We look at what's the quickest way without overspend. I wouldn't say overspending, because you can never really sort of, I guess, with a unit, you could spend 20, 30
Definitely,
grand, do a kitchen, bathroom, you're not going to be back. But what's the quickest and shortest way to make an extra dollar in regards to a bit of extra value, a return investment, and it's by spending. We just had one at Sturdy Parade, which we spent. Owner was overseas, it was vacant. Literally didn't even do that. Floor was fine actually. We did paint, light fittings, and styled the place, and that alone brought a lot of value in the.
And you can do those small things to get a big result, because, like you said, you can do flooring, paint. Let's say the kitchen, if you don't want to do a full reno, just change your bench tops.
Bench tops and the cabinets.
Exactly. Cabinets.
Electric doesn't really matter, or just dishwasher, little things like that.
Absolutely. Put the stainless appliances in, go to the Good Guys, whatever, get a new one for $300-400, and it makes an old 70s stove look brand new kind of thing. So it's just the illusion sometimes of making it look, more than what it is.
And what about you get those old splashbacks and just spray painting a different colour?
Yeah, look,
Like something, like if you're...
as long as you're good at it, it's not like they get the mag wheels will change the colour kind of thing, and you've got new mags. But look, if the finish is good, definitely, go for it without a doubt.
Okay. Cool. Well, any questions?
Any questions at all?
What do you think about?
Couple of questions to the shout out to Derek Cranston, Anmol, Lisa, and Lisa. Say g'day.
Lisa.
Well, probably while having a look at questions, I'll speak from Northern Beaches' point of view, kind of what's happening out there as well. Is so I service from pretty much Palm Beach, Manly, the triangle across the French's Forest, so that little pocket there, up and down all day. And what's kind of been happening out there? So yes, there has been a lot on the market, probably the last 24 months, and I think it's more on the back of anything, believe it or not, is the bank's lack of lending and the hard criteria to get to. Like punters I'm speaking to on the ground, there's still people want to buy it. It's just so much harder to get finance. But just recently, the banks have dropped the interest rates, made it a little bit easier, with their assessment with APRA.
Yep.
And it's so it has been very quiet, but it's so interesting what's happening in the last 4 weeks from a valuer. Like I'm independent from everything. Probably the last 4 weeks, from what I heard on the ground across the board, groups of people coming through the open homes has been phenomenal. And that's one thing we look for indicators, and that's why I always speak to agents, what's happening there, because I need to be on top of this. And this is why I love, this Facebook thing, especially what you guys do. I watch it every Monday night, because I think everyone should be, if you're looking at property or buying, be on top of all the information, what's happening out there, because essentially that's what we do. But the people coming through open homes, it's big numbers for the Northern Beaches. And on top of that is if you also look at some of the clearance rates in Northern Beaches compared to the rest of the Sydney market.
71% 2 weeks ago, 65 last week, strong.
And I think, it's looks like there could be a bit of a turn in the market, interest starting to come back into it. And it could be potentially good buying. I think there's such good value out there potentially at the moment. Like you look at some, just off the top of my head, your Chromas, your Narrowena, speaking, it's like you can get in there, a house like a mil, one.
And technically, money's cheap. If banks are giving you money at the moment, it's at what 3.5%.
Yeah.
Or not
So
even. I
what's
think
like
you
the
can-
sense?
Just a quick question.
Yes,
Bank
Mr.
valuers
Novak.
always ask real estate agents for comparables.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, so we a bank valuer generally asks the agent for comparables. Is that
All the time. So
all the
is there
time?
a chance where real estate agents can get paid for this?
Yeah.
Is that coming up?
This is what a valuer does.
Yeah.
So we do their job as well.
Yeah.
So it's like we're the idiots who didn't study as hard as you, so you get us to do the work for you.
Exactly right. No, that is true.
No,
And to be honest, I try and collate as much information as
Yeah.
possible. If it's good, bad, or otherwise, sometimes brokers go, they put that in the bin kind of thing. But
Yes.
it's better for us to work with more than less. So
Yeah.
we always yell out, what have you got? Because like you said, maybe you've done something off market and it's coming more and more predominant, especially things like, selling off Facebook
Yeah.
now and social media. That it's changing how
Yeah.
things are being done, and we have to be on top of that as well. Like that's why we yell out,
Yeah.
what are you?
And I
guys
will
doing?
say, for an agent point of view, your vendor does not get paid unless the buyer settles, and an agent doesn't get paid unless it settles. So, as much as it may feel like we're doing their work, which we are, we need them. Unless they're a cash buyer,
Yeah.
which
yeah.
is commercial's great. Plenty
yeah.
of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was I thinking?
Work for ads.
Yes.
Shout out for ads.
So,
Money.
what? Yeah. So what work can you do? So I reckon even if you've got a rare property that you're hearing, because a lot of people go to market, they may be investing 5, 10, 15, 20 grand in marketing. It may even be, what can your services do? A client will get you in, if they're getting figures all over the shop from agents and they don't really know an agent, so they're just sort of picking one out of the hat, you could do a pre-market valuation.
Yeah.
If you're doing a will to chop up money
So
for
this,
your kids.
so this is the answer now to the original first question, is what is the difference between an agent's evaluation
Yeah.
and a valuer?
Yeah, exactly. So
Ours is all talking. His is actual.
exactly. So we registered, and by law, our valuations can be relied on for mortgage purposes, stamp duty,
Yep.
accounting purposes, where they can actually rely upon that. Obviously, for you guys, probably more of a market, appraisal for the owners, give maybe an understanding, but that can't go beyond that
Yep.
as far as being able to be relied upon. I'm sure the process, what we go through, is quite similar
Yes.
as far as finding the value, but what our valuation can be relied on, that's why you need a registered
And is
valuer.
there anything to do at end of financial year? Any reason people should do it now?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the time, some of the valuations we do is capital gains tax, stamp duty, accounting, will, establish
Yeah.
fair market value. And a lot of people, one thing I would say it's for why you can engage a value is to get the highest and best use value out of your property. And this is where it can come things back like zonings. What can you actually do with your property? You might have a house on R3 zoning on 800 square metres. 99% of people go, that's a house on 900 square metres. But what we can say is,
That's a
look,
unit development.
that's a townhouse development. The value's, it's not 1.2 million because it's a house on, that
Yeah.
land. The value's 2 million because we can go, look, it's a 4 townhouse site, and understanding the value, or you might be able to put a granny flat on there, maximise the rental.
And how long does the vow last for?
Yep, so generally it's 3 months
Yep.
For bank valuations. And obviously for accounting purposes, depending on the circumstances, it's generally 1 to 6 months, obviously.
So a little hack there in a rising market, which we're probably seeing 3 to 4 months. Put it this way, in that rising market 2 years ago, everyone should have been getting a new vow on their property because a lot of people would have bought it, well, especially if you bought it 5, 10 years prior, new vow, that means there's a shitload of equity that you could use. Because I reckon you find there's people that have never done a vow on their property.
100%.
They've owned it for 30 years and they've got no baseline to do anything.
Definitely, and I see it daily as well because a little thing, what happens when we get instructions from ABC Bank, whatever it is, they'll have an owner's estimated value on the property. And this comes back to the thing where value is concerned. A lot of the time, let's say if it was $1 million, a lot of the time we'll put 2 million. Because, and they'll go, holy moly, is my property worth that much? Because they may have lived there since 1980. Go, my God, look at the value of my property. So it's always good to keep the top.
Refresh.
And let's face it, the property is generally the highest valued asset you have. So definitely.
And people can contact you direct, or do you have to go through a broker or 15 chains?
No,
or can they just call you
absolutely.
and get a vow,
Directly.
pay cash?
The grand ones. No, no, absolutely. Contact me direct.
your
I'm
details
sure the
below.
Novak team will put in the comment section. So anything Northern Beaches, happy to help out.
Thanks,
Perfect.
Adam.
Thank you very much.
Nice.
Ollie,
Cheers.
thanks.
Have a good one.